What filters into practicing in a way that doesn't align with your values is having to read over and over in school that this group is likely to have this and this group is likely to have that. And they don't contextualize it. And the med-surg textbooks will say if you're Black, you have a harder time controlling your blood pressure. Those stereotypes get perpetuated in the literature, and then students, unbeknownst to them, graduate believing that, oh, well, your blood pressure is high because the textbook says it's likely to be high, and then they don't do anything about it. And then the person ends up having a stroke, and the end of the narrative is they're just a statistic. They're not helping to help students recognize the fact that race is not a biological construct. Students will walk away thinking, oh my goodness, I'm Black, so I'm at risk for this, and there's no context. They don't talk about how being subjected to racism every day, how that increases your cortisol level, and it's the cortisol level that can cause an inflammatory process and make your blood pressure go up. It can put you at risk for preterm delivery, but yet they won't say that it's racism that's the risk, that's putting you at risk. They say it to you, the fact that you're Black. We have to change that. You have now been conditioned to see and believe that this is going to happen because of who you are, because you're Black. So this is a norm. And when we see things as a norm, we don't treat it the same way when it's not the norm. And that becomes the lens through which they see things. You have a stroke, it's not a problem because statistics say you were gonna have a stroke. So that's the statistics just living out. And I remove myself from it. It's not my fault. It's because you're Black.
One of the things that my office has been asked to consult around is this notion of how do we start to add anti-racism into SIM software? So we have like diverse SIM mannequins, and we have different arms to do IVs and, diagnostics for dermatology and other stuff. But like the actual simulations in and of themselves, the scenarios, the case studies that we use to teach students, those haven't been so integrated. So a perfect example of this is whenever we do a report or a case discussion or whatever to present a patient to the larger clinical team, it usually goes something like this. I have a 23-year-old white male who is a motor vehicle accident victim, and we just roll that off and we never interrogate the appropriate use of race in that context. So a lot of times what ends up happening is in other clinical scenarios, patients will be racial profiled in their medical record. So you'll say something along the lines of, oh, I have a 19-year-old Gravida 1 para 2, or that wouldn't be possible, but let's say Gravida 5 para 2, Black pregnant person, You've already stated that that person has been pregnant 5 times, but they only have 2 living children. You've already added the Black race to it when it's not really relevant. So it's this idea of how do we do better case studies? How do we do better simulation? How do we start to think about better ways of conveying clinical information that's reasonable and necessary without racially profiling? When patients are racially profiled, it automatically does reduce the level of care. When we include in our reports to each other off shift, you've already primed people. Like we already know that bias can be implicit and or explicit. So people are already formatting ideas or thoughts, or they're starting to use the heuristics that are necessary, especially if you have a very busy night or a very busy clinical day. Yeah, I mean, it contributes very much to like the environment of care that you're going to curate when you walk into a room.
We really have to get to a place of humility where we can understand that the patient's outcome is oftentimes it's so tied to the quality of care that's being delivered. That's a hard pill to swallow because no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to treat patients differently if they're Black or if they're white or if they have English is not their first language. No one says that intentionally, at least I don't think so. However, you get into the clinical arena and something happens where the quality of care is different Now, you could run away from that fact, or you can ask yourself, what am I doing that makes this person's outcome less than stellar? And what can I do differently? What am I willing to do differently? Why are patients dying?
I mean, one of the things is I want us to wrestle with in our sim lab is what is the basic minimum amount of information that you need in order to be able to care well for a patient, number one. Number two, what's the pertinent and relevant information that you need in order to be able to provide very good care for people? And number three, where in that care plan are you going to elicit from the person how they want to be cared for? If I can do those three things for nursing students, I've done my job. Because we can think all we want around how we want to best care for people, but without giving patients the space to elicit from them what they want from us, we're still not doing our job and we're causing harm. The first time that people talk about or encounter or really have to disrupt or unpack their thoughts, feelings, emotions, whatever, it shouldn't be in a clinical environment when somebody needs care from you. That's the whole point of simulation, right? It's this idea that it should give people a space to walk through their biases, their judgments, their insights, you develop your clinical acumen, from experiences. And so the first time you experience something should not be with a patient. It should not be with a family. It should not be, in real time. I mean, that's the whole point of school. Educational exposure, really giving you the space, mentored, guided, to allow you to really, really understand what care is needed in that moment and are you well trained to be able to provide it. Because I think we can do better than trial and error.